You know the rhythm of your own apartment better than you know most people's voices. The way the floor creaks by the bathroom door, the exact second the fridge kicks on, the angle of light at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. You've lived alone so long, you can hear when something is 1 degree off. Call it a skill. It's also a tell. 10 years by yourself does something to a man. And if you're a black Gen X dude who hit that mark already, there's a specific psychology that came with it. And most of it didn't start with you. I'm Franklin, and today we're getting into the heads of black Gen X men who've been running their own house by themselves for a decade or more. What it built, what it broke, what it's quietly doing right now while you're nodding along. Let's start with the obvious thing nobody actually names. You like it. You like coming home and not having to perform. You like the towel being where you left it. You like eating a sandwich standing over the sink at 11:47 p.m. with no commentary. You like that the remote is exactly where you set it down on Sunday. You earned this peace, and anybody who tries to talk you out of it sounds like they're trying to take something from you. That instinct is real. Hold on to that thought because we're going to come back to it. Now here's where the story gets bigger than your living room. The U.S. Census Bureau pulled the long view on black marriage, and the numbers move in one direction. In 1970, about 35.6% of black men had never been married. By 2020, that figure was 51.4%. That's a shift of nearly 16 points across your lifetime. Black demographics, pulling from the 2023 American Community Survey, puts it even plainer. Only about 31% of black Americans are currently married, compared to 48% of all Americans. And about half of black adults have never been married. So when you look around at your friends, your cousins, the guys you came up with, and you notice a whole lot of them are running solo households too, you're not imagining a pattern. You're inside one, a measured one, a national one. That matters because the script you got handed about adulthood didn't account for this. The version your parents lived, get a job, get a wife, get a house, get a kid, in that order by 28. That template cracked for a lot of men in your bracket, and the world didn't bother writing a new one. So you wrote one yourself. You built a life that works for one. You optimized the grocery run. You learned what cuts of meat actually freeze well. You picked which weeknight is laundry night without anybody assigning it. You became, basically, the general manager of a one-man operation that runs cleaner than most households with 4 people in them. And here's where the psychology starts to bend. After about year 3 of living alone, your tolerance for friction drops. After year 7, it falls through the floor. By year 10, you have what I'd call a low-noise nervous system. Somebody chewing too loud is a felony. Somebody using your good pan is grounds for a sit-down. A guest leaving a wet towel on the bed is enough to make you reconsider the whole friendship. You didn't get pickier on purpose. You got pickier because nothing in your environment pushed back on you for a decade. The house agrees with you about everything. Of course you started to think everybody else should too. This is the first real cost, and it's quiet. The dating pool shrinks not because of who's available, but because your patience for the early stage friction of getting to know somebody has shortened. The first dinner where she's 12 minutes late, you're already doing math on whether this is worth it. The first weekend where he was to come over twice in a row, you're calculating recovery time. You're not mean, you're just calibrated to a frequency that only one person broadcasts on. You. So who do you talk to? Let's look at that. AARP did a friendship study on men over 50 that lays out something that should sting a little. Men over 50 are more likely than women over 50 to say they feel lonely. And inside that group, Gen X men report feeling lonelier than the boomers above them. The boomers, for all their flaws, kept their friendships in tighter circles. The same poker game, the same fishing trip, the same dudes from the plant. Gen X men scattered. The same study found that 95% of men believe friends are essential to a happy, healthy life. But the friendships men actually maintain tend to be shoulder to shoulder, not face to face. Translation, y'all talk about the game, the election, the new restaurant, the truck somebody bought. Y'all do not talk about the thing that's been sitting on your chest since March. You can feel this in your own phone. Scroll your texts right now. Count how many of your boys you've talked to face-to-face this year versus how many you've only sent a meme to. Count how many calls lasted more than 4 minutes. You watch the game together. You don't process anything together. And if you live alone on top of that, there's nobody at home filling in the gap. The wife isn't there asking how that conversation with your brother actually went. The kid isn't there forcing you to explain something out loud. The internal monologue just keeps running, uninterrupted, for 10 years. Here's where I'm going to tell you something that should make you sit up. The Russell Sage Foundation Journal published a 4-decade analysis covering 1980 to 2019, looking at who lives alone in America. Black Americans live alone at higher rates than white Americans across pretty much every age group they measured. And the share of older men living alone has been climbing the whole time. So when you feel like you're in a strange demographic, single, black, Gen X, 10 years deep in your own crib, you're not strange at all. You're a documented trend. The country built itself around this outcome and never bothered to mention it. Now the part nobody wants to hear. A scoping review on middle-aged adults living alone, published through the National Library of Medicine, found that this group reports higher rates of depression and psychological distress than middle-aged adults who live with somebody. Middle-aged men living alone specifically show elevated cardiovascular risk. A separate prospective cohort study published in BMC Public Health found that men living alone had roughly twice the mortality risk of men who didn't, even after adjusting for other factors. That finding did not show up for women. Living alone, statistically, hits men harder than it hits women. Those are the numbers. And before you click off because Franklin's getting dark on you, pump the brakes. I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you what the research says so you can make an informed move. Because here's the second half of that research, and this is where it gets interesting. Boston University's medical school put out work in 2021 on midlife loneliness and brain health. They found that people who reported persistent loneliness in midlife had higher risk of dementia and Alzheimer's 18 years later. But, and this is the part that matters for you, people who reported only transient loneliness, meaning they felt lonely sometimes but bounced back, actually had lower dementia risk than people who reported no loneliness at all. The researchers framed it as resilience. The capacity to sit with a hard feeling, name it, and come back from it appears to be protective for the brain. So the question isn't whether you ever feel lonely living alone. Of course you do. The question is whether the loneliness is the wallpaper of your life or a weather pattern that passes through. The men who get into trouble at the 10-year mark are not the ones who occasionally feel a pang on a Sunday afternoon. The men who get into trouble are the ones who stopped noticing they felt anything at all. The flatline, the shrug, the "I'm good" that's been on a loop for so long it's a reflex, not an answer. If somebody asks how you're doing and your mouth says, "I can't complain," before your brain even checks, that's the part to watch. Which brings us to the conversation about getting help. And I know some of you just tensed up. Hang with me. A review in the National Library of Medicine on black men and mental health treatment laid out what you already suspect. Black men are less likely to seek mental health treatment than white men, even when the distress levels are the same or higher. The 2019 National Health Interview Survey showed white adults received mental health treatment at higher rates than black adults. There's a separate body of research on how masculinity norms, the version of manhood a lot of us got handed, work against the idea of sitting in somebody's office and talking about your interior life. The fear of being labeled, the worry about what shows up on a record, the cost, the
not knowing anybody who looks like you on the other side of the desk. I'm not going to sit here and pretend the answer is just go to therapy, like that's a clean fix. What I will say is that the men I know personally who broke their 10-year solo patterns, for the better, not by force, did it by adding one human contact per week that required eye contact. One, not a group, not a movement, not a whole social rebrand, one standing thing. Tuesday lunch with the same dude. Saturday morning at the same gym at the same time so the same 3 guys nod at you. A monthly thing with your sister where the phone goes face down. It sounds small. It is small. That's the point. After 10 years alone, big changes feel like an invasion. Small changes you can run. Let's talk money, because this is the part where the psychology meets the wallet. 10 years living alone reshapes your finances in ways you don't always clock. You probably know exactly what your monthly nut is to the dollar. You probably have a spreadsheet or the mental version of one, and you probably make moves nobody else would understand because they only make sense for an audience of one. You bought the smaller fridge on purpose. You drive a car that's older than it needs to be because nobody's in the passenger seat judging it. You probably have a household budget that's really just a me budget with no slack for anybody else's preferences. That discipline is a flex. Most married couples in this country couldn't survive 2 months on what you run on. But the discipline becomes a wall. When somebody new enters the picture, your money habits feel less like prudence and more like a fortress. You don't want to mix accounts. You don't want to split anything. You don't want to renegotiate the grocery list. And the older that fortress gets, the harder it is for anybody to climb in. There's a study out of the University of Zurich, led by a researcher named Kramer, that tracked long-term singlehood and well-being using survey data from Germany and the UK.
The finding was that prolonged singlehood in adulthood is associated with moderate dips in well-being, and the dip widens the longer the singlehood lasts. Nothing catastrophic. The gap grows. Year 10 is a real threshold. Year 15 is steeper. Year 20 steeper still. The slope is real, which means doing nothing isn't a neutral choice. The clock is in the room with you. Now I want to land on something honest, because I'm not in the business of telling you your life is a problem. The same research that flags the risks also points at growth. Men who've lived alone for a decade often have stronger self-knowledge than their married counterparts. They know what they actually like. They know what they actually believe. They've had to make every decision themselves, so they know their own taste, their own rhythms, their own threshold for nonsense. They are not waiting on permission to do anything. That's a kind of freedom most of the country is paying therapists to find. You got it for free. The trick is to keep self-sufficiency from sliding into self-isolation. Those two things live next door to each other, and they look almost identical from the street. Here's the inside-the-house specific that I think nobody says out loud. The calendar narrows. Year 1 alone, your calendar still has other people's events on it. Birthday parties, cookouts, somebody's kid's recital. By year 5, the calendar is mostly yours. Appointments, workouts, the trip you booked yourself. By year 10, the calendar is so much yours that adding somebody else's thing to it feels like a tax. You start declining invitations because the disruption feels disproportionate to the payoff. 3 hours at a cookout costs you a whole afternoon of recalibration. So you skip. And every skip teaches the people in your life to stop inviting. And then one day you notice the invitations slow down, and it feels like the world forgot you, when really you trained the world to leave you alone, and the world is just a very obedient student. That's the loop. That's the thing to interrupt. Not by overhauling your life. Not by getting married next Thursday. By saying yes to one thing this month that you would normally decline. Just one. Sit in the discomfort of being around other people's noise, other people's timing, other people's choices. Notice that you survive it. Notice that your apartment is still exactly how you left it when you get home. Nothing was taken from you. You just stretched a muscle that's been sitting still. Here's the part I want you to walk away with. The version of you that lives alone at year 10 is more complicated than the story sounds. The data says you're more likely to be lonely than your married peers, more likely to carry cardiovascular risk, less likely to ask for help, and operating with a nervous system that prefers silence. The same data says you're probably more self-aware, more financially disciplined, and more capable of bouncing back from a hard feeling than people give you credit for. Both things are true at the same time. You are a man with a specific set of strengths and a specific set of risks, and the only thing required of you is to look at both with the same set of eyes. 10 years alone taught you how to be by yourself. The next move is to learn, slowly, on your own terms, how to let one person at a time back into the rhythm of the place. Not to fill a hole, not because the research says so, because at some point the apartment that protected you starts to define you, and you didn't survive everything you survived just to end up known only by your own four walls. Before you click off, let me give you one more thing, because I'd be doing you dirty if I let you leave on a neat little bow. The thing about year 10 is that it's a checkpoint, not a verdict. The guys who hit 15 and 20 in good shape, and they exist, I know some of them, share a couple of habits worth naming out loud. They have at least one person in their life who has permission to tell them the truth. Not a yes man, not a drinking buddy, somebody who will say, "You've been weird for about 3 weeks. What's going on?" If nobody in your circle has that clearance right now, that's the first appointment to make. Pick the person. Tell them they got the job. Most folks are honored to be asked. The second habit, they keep their body moving in a way that puts them around other bodies. Not a home gym, not a solo run with headphones in. A class, a league, a walking group. Something where the same faces show up on a schedule and notice when you don't. The research on middle-aged men living alone keeps circling back to cardiovascular risk, and the cleanest hedge against that risk happens to also be the cleanest hedge against the loneliness. Moving your body in a room with other people in it. 2 birds, 1 stone, and you don't have to talk about your feelings to get the benefit. The third habit is the one most guys skip. They get a physical every year. Blood work, blood pressure, the whole panel. Living alone means nobody else is watching your numbers for you, and the cardiovascular risk the research keeps flagging doesn't announce itself until it's loud. Make the appointment. Put it on the calendar you guard so carefully. You spent 10 years building a life that runs clean. Protect the engine that runs it. Catch you on the next one. The video playing right there on the screen, start with that.